Hello there, welcome back to another one of my videos. Right, this one we're going to get stuck right into something that's been lacking in my videos for a while. I did a little bit on suspension earlier, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but I think we need to get back into it because it's really important. It's an important subject. So let's start with a little bit of history. Well, as we all know, Lambrettas really aren't the best at handling machines. But back when they were developed, they weren't really designed for racing. They were just a commuter scooter. So all they had to do was take people around the centre of Rome, do a bit of shopping, back home, down the little casita, have a few beers, and everybody was happy. Unfortunately, I can't give you too much information on the really early models because I've just never had one. So I've never had a Model A or Model C or whatever, or Model D, or just wasn't interested because basically I started off as a bit of a mod and then went into being a scooter boy, and we just didn't ride that stuff back in the 80s. So all I've had really is Series 3s, and that's where I've been most of my life. So I can't really give you much on them, apart from they had some weird suspension setup with some sort of torsion bar, which I don't think was very effective because they quickly moved away from that and on to the Series 1 where they had a proper suspension unit. So what we've got is just a basic shocker. This is virtually what they ended up with on the first Series 1, Series 2, Series 3s, was just a normal suspension setup, which is just a spring. You've got a hydraulic cylinder here with oil inside, a piston, some plates that allow the oil to pass through at a fixed rate. So if your oil's too thin in there, it'll bounce up and down like a pogo stick. If the oil's too thick, it'll be quite stiff and unresponsive, so then you'll bounce on holes and stuff. So having the correct oil flow and the correct viscosity of oil in the shocker and the right amount of plates that create that friction, that drag, and slow down the oil passing up and down between one side to the other, it makes all that difference. So suspension's really important if you want to keep your bike firmly fixed and firmly adhered to the tarmac surface. Right, so the other part of our back end, we've got our suspension that goes on here and up to the chassis. Then the Lambretta incorporated its whole engine casing as the swinging arm. Now a Lambretta engine casing is quite rigid because it's cast aluminium. So there's not that much flex, but we do have flex on the engine mounts because we have to have rubber engine mounts to reduce vibration. Now, the harder the engine mounts, the less flex you've got, but the increase of vibration just goes right up, and it's just too uncomfortable. I don't know if you've ever ridden a bike with super hard engine mounts, but it sort of rattles your teeth out. I can remember being at Calafat one year when we sort of melted our piston, and we borrowed an engine off a guy called, what was his name? Soisa, a very famous racer in Spain, and he borrowed us an engine which was a 250 Bultaco piston with Series 2 engine mounts. It was, for me, it was just unbearable. I couldn't cope with the amount of vibration. Like ripped me, just tore me to bits. So yeah, I spent the rest of the day in the pits watching the other guys go around. What we got with these Series 1 and Series 2 engine mounts, they were basically designed for 125, 150 engines that were a little bit more balanced and they didn't vibrate so much, so they didn't need softer mounts. So they got away with this, but when they went up to 175 and 200, things had to change because the vibration just increased and it wasn't acceptable for people for normal riding. So they had to change stuff, and they went to, let's whip this one out. As we know it, Is that all in the picture? Oh, so let's bring it around a bit. Or we'll just bring the camera in, right. The Series 3 engine mounts, which were wider. So you haven't got the rubber all the way through. It's got the rubber on the very ends here. So the idea of that is the further apart the rubber is, the more leverage it has. So therefore it makes it more difficult for the engine to twist if the engine mounts are wider. So the wider your engine mounts, the less the engine will twist. Now, Kickback said that stiffer mounts on the back of your suspension will stop the engine from twisting so much. He's probably right, but unfortunately there's a bit of a downside to that, because if you've put stiff mounts on the back of the shocker, you then twist the shocker, and the result is failing seals, because the rod pushes from one side to the other and damages the seal. So that's not a very good idea. You've always got to have some sort of give in the suspension to protect the seal and the rod. If not, you'll damage the rod or twist it, or eventually destroy your seals. Right, so here's a motorbike suspension that's been converted for a Lambretta, and it's got brass bushes fitted in, top and bottom. Now, this would have stopped the flex greatly on the engine at the back, stopped the engine from flexing from side to side like this, because these bushes have got no give, that's all. But it's going to increase vibration. But the other thing is, the seal failed, because the extra pressure on that rod from side to side, because your engine's still going to want to flex, this is trying to stop it, all the pressure goes on the seal and the seal's failed. The other bad thing about having solid mounts on here is it also puts extra pressure on the back of the casing here, and it can crack or break completely the mounting off on the back of your engine casing. So solid mount suspension really is a bad idea. Right, so back to these Series 1 and Series 2 and Series 3. Let's have a look at this. Back here, just want to show you something. That your Series 1, Series 2 engine mounts, because they're just solid, small, short, stubby ones, the rubber in them is quite rigid. There's not much, you can feel there's not much flex there. So they will keep the engine quite rigid, but they do increase the vibration greatly. But when we come to, that is off, the Series 3 engine mounts, we come to the Series 3 engine mounts, you'll see that the rubber's in the end and it's much softer. It's just softer, but it doesn't need to be so hard because they're further apart. So that leads me to thinking of making a new engine mount with a longer engine mounting bar and a longer engine mount. Now we're only going to do it on one side, because there's another thing that you'll notice with Lambrettas is when the engine mountings fail, this side always collapses up and this side always collapses down. And the reason for that is your suspension's on this side and the wheels here, it's constantly trying to twist the engine like this. So all the pressure on that one is going up and all the pressure on that one is going down. And you'll see when they've got failed engine mounts that that engine mount is always up here somewhere and your wheel is slightly twisted. So you end up with a wheel tilted over from behind on your Lambretta. Now, motorbikes in the 70s and 80s, during racing, they developed all sorts of stuff on, it was all about stiffness, and they were going stiffer and stiffer chassis. And once they got stiffer and stiffer chassis, they decided it was still flexing, and they decided it was the rear swinging arm. And they were still working at that time with tubular swinging arms. So Japanese developed a box section swinging arm, and then that made it stiffer, improved the handling. Then they went even stiffer still and reinforced it. And they went stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. And eventually the bike started sliding away. And they're like, what's happening now? We were going great. We were getting better and better handling all the time. But now all of a sudden the bike's breaking away in corners. And they realised that they'd gone too stiff. If you can imagine, that's your suspension. When the bike's going down the track in a straight line, the suspension is going up and down and working correctly. But as you're banking over, the harder and harder you bank over, the swinging arm still wants to go like this, but the suspension wants to go like that. So the whole thing, the swinging arm can't go like that because it's twisted at this angle. So what's happened is you've got no suspension anymore. You're relying on the flex in the swinging arm to keep that contact on the track. So once they took all the flex out, you couldn't get any of this going on. It got too stiff, bike breaks away. So there is a limit to how stiff you can make the chassis and the suspension and the swinging arm. Sorry, not the suspension, but the swinging arm. Because the swinging arm needs to have some flex to keep that contact good on the surface of the track when you're banking over. When it's up vertical, the suspension works. When it's leaning right over, that wants to go like that, but the suspension only wants to go that way. What happens is bike breaks away. So you need some flex. Right, just move that out of the way. Okay, so we're back over this side where I fitted in my new bushes in the last episode I did on the BGM suspension. Failure, I do a lot of two-up riding, so it could have been the excessive weight, two-up riding didn't help, but the new ones, they seem to be bonded the rubber onto the metal bush. So I'm hoping they're better, because the old ones were simply a rubber sleeve with a bush pushed through them, and I think that's one of the reasons that they failed so easily. These seem to be uprated. When I fitted them in, I noticed, I went, ooh, these are bonded on, and it looks completely different. So we was talking about the flex of the engine in a Lambretta. It doesn't help the handling too much because it flexes a bit too much if you're a sport rider. If you're just a normal rider, you know, I reckon just normal BGM mounts that are slightly harder on this side to the other side, because this is the side, your right hand side engine mount is what takes all the force, because your transmission's on this side, suspension's on this side, this takes all the load basically. So this one needs to be a bit stiffer, and that's another reason I've put this cooling heat sink on here, which was in an earlier episode if you want to go back and watch that, and that helps cool the rubber. If the rubber's cooler, it stays more consistent. If it gets too hot, obviously rubber will get softer. The hotter it gets, the softer it becomes, and then your engine starts weaving all over the show. So keeping your engine mounts cool also helps handling. So talking about shockers, BGM shocker and some other ones are now much more modern. They've got adjustment on the dampening, which means you can adjust the reaction of your suspension. If you weaken it, loosen it off on a lower setting, the suspension will respond quicker. If you harden it up, it responds slower. So it allows the oil to flow at a different speed. So if you're trying to set up your suspension, if it's too bouncy, you can add dampening. But if the spring's also too soft, you can then add preload. I try not to do too much preload, but mine's now set up for two-up riding, because the missus is always on the back now, so she likes to come out with me. So my spring's set up now for 2 up all the time, more or less. And if I get on it on my own, I'll just suffer it. But yeah, so I think I've done a video on setting up your rear suspension and sag and all that kind of thing. If you're riding 2 up, basically you want to set it up more or less the same, but with a stiffer spring. BGM now do an uprated version on the version 3, and I believe it's got a stiffer spring in it, and it's got a few more plates in the dampening as well to help you with more control on the dampening. So the version 3 is the better one to go for. I haven't got it because I just don't have the Wonga. So there is a couple of videos out. I've done a video on rear suspension and front suspension on setup. Also, Kickback Garage has done a video on suspension setup as well. He's quite good with his suspension stuff, so you could watch that and compare the two and enjoy. Make yourself a cup of tea. So if you watch plenty of my videos, you pretty much know that I'm about to make something again. So what I've decided to do is to make myself an upgraded engine mount. One for road use, not for the track. So back in the 80s, a lot of people had put a longer engine mounting bar and double engine mounts on the right hand side where the engine casing is, and that helped with the handling. But because it's a double engine mount, it's twice as much rubber, it increases vibration. So I don't want double rubber, but I want to increase the width. So what I'm going to do is, here we go, Series 1 engine mount bar, Series 3 engine mount bar, which is Series 1, 2, Series 3 engine mount bar, which is longer by quite a lot. Then I've got my even longer from my old race bike engine mounting bolt, so which I use for double mounts back in the 80s. So I'm gonna get this, measure it up, see how far we can go, and make a longer engine mount for the right hand side. So I've got a couple of engine mounts in this case. Rather than using brand new ones, these are still in really good condition. So I'm going to whip them out and chop them up. Right, so we'll measure the difference in length, and that will tell us how much more we can add to the other engine mount. So this one is 284 and this one is 315. Difference is 30 mil. 85, 150, 315, 285, 315. 30 mil, 30 millimeters longer. Well, at the end of this video, we'll put a little bit of a bonus footage in there, and what we'll do is we'll go into this BGM shock and talk about all the technical terms of it, what everything means and how it works. So, you know, you'll understand what rebound is, what compression is, what sag's about, what spring rate is, and all that right at the end of the video. Right, now, swiftly out the lathe, I'll show you what we've done. So far we've emptied out the rubber and the centre on this one, on this engine mount. And this one has been cut up, so we got this section here and this section here. This is the section we're going to be using, and if you want to look at the back, you can see where the rubber is. Rubber's there vulcanized into the mounting. It's a 2-hole one, this, so it's a bit more stiff. It's a bit stiffer than the other ones I've used on my BGM one, so it's liable to be a bit stiffer now, but hopefully we can get rid of that rocking from side to side. So what we've got to do is we've got to add on some of this tube from the last one onto here to increase the length of it, because that still has to go up against the cones and be bolted up, and the rubber is then free to move with the engine. So what we're going to do is this has to be fitted into this. Damn, as you can see, my voice doesn't go out big enough, so I really could do with investing in a press. It has become one. So now it's one piece. I might put a couple of tacks on with the TIG welder, but I don't want to get too much heat in the rubbers, so just a couple of small tacks to stop it moving, and I think that's it. It'll be good. Right, so we've pressed it together, so it's a pressed together fit, so we don't need too much welding done because we're going to rely on that press fit to hold it anyway. So I'm going to put a couple of tacks where it's not seen underneath, so it looks like a nice finish on it, just to be sure, as they say. Oh yeah. And that's it. still a bit hot. Well, that's that done. So we'll have a little swig of beer and then we'll get on with that suspension tutorial. Come on. Right, here we go on rear shockers, suspension units. The first thing we're going to talk about is the type of spring. So you've got basically two types of spring. You've got, as on this one, a progressive spring, and that is noted by the gaps between the coils get smaller at one end and narrower. That's a progressive spring. You can notice by that. Okay? A lineal spring has the same spacings between each coil, so it doesn't change the tension from one end to the other. It's lineal. Okay, so when the spring is compressed, it gets progressively harder as it's progressed over the distance. Doesn't change. Whereas with the progressive spring, because the coils are tighter bound on one end, it makes it much easier to compress the first section. And then when they're compressed together and these coils bind together, start touching each other, the pressure goes onto the wider springs, which are harder to compress. So this has got much more change within its parameters. So they use this spring when you don't have so many adjustments for compression and rebound in the shocker. So this one has only got rebound and adjustment for preload. Preload, so we'll get to preload. Preload, right, the preload of the spring is how much pressure you've put on the spring before it's actually being compressed by the vehicle. So you preload the spring by adjusting down, or on this one it's got a ramped adjuster on the bottom. This one's got ramped adjuster, this one's got a threaded adjuster. So you add extra compression on the spring to preload it to make the spring stiffer. The same on this one. You can stiffen it up by putting more preload. Now, let's go to this one with the lineal spring, and you'll see that this has got on the top an adjuster with a little screw in it, and that is the rebound. So rebound is when the spring is compressed, the shock is compressed, it's how quickly it returns back. So the rebound is obviously the bounce back. So the more rebound you add on, screwing it in, the slower it'll return. So instead of it being fully off, wang, 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 pogo stick, you screw it up and the rebound then reacts slower and slower. The more rebound you add, the slower the spring returns to its normal length. Then on this one, we've also got compression. Now some really fancy shockers have got low speed and high speed compression. So in other words, compression is when the spring is squashed down. So if you're going over small bumps in the road, you've got your low speed compression to regulate. So that's normally the screw on the outside. Then when you go over big bumps and it compresses much quicker, you've got your high speed compression. But we don't have that on our more simple BGM shock. But I thought I'd just explain to you. The compression is when the shocker gets compressed, and you can regulate the speed that it's compressed. So you can slow down that speed. And on some of them, they've got 2 stages. Fast and slow speed. You can adjust the fast compression and you can adjust the slow compression. Adjust it, just do it again. As you just adjust the fast compression, if you go over a whacking great bump, it's going to go whack straight up. You can adjust that. But you don't want that same compression on small bumps. So you'll have less on the small bumps. So it goes over smoothly, but then when it's getting a big bang, it'll control it better. But we've got your BGM shock, trusty BGM. Down here, we'll just spin it round if we can find it. We've got an adjuster for our rebound. Rebound is when the shocker comes back and returns to its normal length. So if it's compressed over a bump, and then you, instead of it going doing straight back, you've got this adjustment here for that rebound, to slow that rebound down. In other words, it controls the spring from coming back to its normal length, and that way you can try and keep that tyre on the road without it bouncing off the road. So the whole idea of suspension is to keep good contact, good tyre contact on the road at all times, no matter what is happening. So we've also got on this one our preload adjustment, which is at the top. So I've got mine quite adjusted up quite a lot because I'm riding 2 up, and this spring isn't that strong. It's only rated up to 240 pounds. So I'm expecting that if that's its maximum load. So is that the whole, I need to see what BGM says, is that the whole ride, the rider or passengers, or is it the vehicle and the passengers together up to 240 pounds? Because that's not a lot. That is quite low, and we've got a lot of big lads nowadays, so that is why they ended up doing a version 3 with a heavier spring, so you have less preload. Preload's not too good. When you've got too much preload on, yeah, you will lose sag, and sag is very important. So there's 2 different types of sag. We're going on to sag now. 2 different types of sag. There's the loaded sag and unloaded sag. Now, unloaded sag is determined by no passenger on the bike freestanding, and you just allow the bike to sit on its suspension and measure from fully extended how far the deflection is. So deflection is the distance that it moves. Okay, so you measure the deflection. That is pre-rider sag, right? Then you do the sag with the rider on. And the rider needs to be fully kitted with his leathers and his helmet and gloves and everything, as if he was going to ride the bike round the track. Then you load him up, stick him on the bike and see how far your deflection is. So you've got now 2 measurements of deflection. Okay, so what you really want is the unloaded deflection to be 1/3 of loaded deflection, and that is your perfect sag.
I am so tired.